Gang, hope you're very well. Happy Monday. Just be waiting for Scotty Waters to come on, and then we're going to talk all things leadership and life changer, which is business, which is brilliant. If you guys have got any questions, feel free to post them below. The more engaging you are, the better. Super lucky to have a very smart man jumping on tonight. No, you're not jumping on Janela. Not you tonight, mate. And have plenty to say about all things leadership, life changes, and hopefully some ways to help those of you navigating a very challenging period at the moment with COVID. Trent, big fella, good to have you on. So, very quick backstory with Scotty is that I actually met him when I was in Melbourne, and I was having a shocker of a time in Melbourne, but one of the good things that did come out of Melbourne was spending plenty of time with both him and Paul Roos, two people that I kind of look up to and respect a lot, and almost in a very roundabout way of taking them on as mentors, which for anyone who doesn't have a mentor, I think it's super important. And obviously for blokes, which is what Momentum's mainly about, to have a male role model or mentor is a super valuable piece as well. So wait for the big fella to get on. I'm not entirely sure that he knows exactly how to work this IGTV, but we will soon find out if he knows what's going on. I had messaged him, so we are good. Guys, for those of you who are just jumping on now, feel free to post below any questions you got. Scotty is an absolute wizard of knowledge, and we'll have plenty to say. So if you guys have got any questions, we love the engagement. The more questions, the better. And also, for those of you who are just jumping on, feel free, if you guys have got anyone that you do want to hear from, to shoot me a message either here on Momentum or over on my page, and I'll line them up for the coming weeks. We've got some pretty cool people set up over the next 3 weeks, and a few others that we're looking to get on as well. So if you guys have anyone of interest, feel free to let me know and I'll do my best to get them on. We'll just wait for Scotty. He should be here. Ryan Gosling. Okay. Sure. I think I've got his number somewhere. So I'll look into Ryan Gosling. If you guys have got anyone else, then I can definitely reach out to some contacts. I think I know a few people in Hollywood that are mates with Gozzy. We call him Gozzy. Just people that are in his inner circle call him Gozzy. So yeah, other than Gozzy, if you guys it's a recent addition. If you guys have got anyone else other than Gozzy that you want on, just let me know. But we'll wait a moment or two. Genoa is having a great time in the background. Ella, absolutely loving himself sick. But we'll wait for Scotty. Hopefully he won't be much longer. Not entirely sure he knows how best to use the gram. Genoa, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you here. For those jumping on now, we've had one special request of Ryan Gosling, but if you've got anyone else that you really want to hear from over the kind of coming weeks and months, then feel free to post below some pretty outrageous requests. But Lucky Momentum has some really good contacts, so we'll get Ryan Gosling on in the next couple of weeks probably, and move forward from there. Roosie, welcome. The Rock, okay. So The Rock and Gosling, I think they're good mates actually, so we'll be able to manage that. No doubt Brad Pitt as well. Brad Pitt, The Rock, and Ryan Gosling. Beautiful. All right, Matt Jackdaw. There we go. Thanks, Tiff. Bring back the Tiff. That one hopefully will be a tiny bit easier than Brad Pitt, The Rock, and Ryan Gosling, but you never know. If anyone's got any contacts, like a phone number or something, then feel free to let us know and we can get in touch with some of our mates in Hollywood. We're just waiting for Scotty and then we'll start. But if there's any other requests, feel free to post them and we'll talk about... What are you going to talk about with Scotty? Very good question. Scotty Waters. So Scotty Waters actually we'll get a Sharman as well. Ella, absolutely great idea. Scotty Waters actually used to play for Fremantle back in the day, Western Australian fella. If you type in Google Scotty Waters, he had he still is actually a really fair rooster, but him and his Freo Dockers kit back in the day, I forgot how much of a fine specimen he was. So he used to play for Freo, then he coached Saints. Guys, we're back. That was actually just Scotty Waters ringing. So good news is he's coming real soon. Bad news is you may have just had a minute or two of absolutely nothing. So we'll wait for Scotty. Feel free, you got any questions, requests, punch them through and we'll get started real soon. But back to Scotty. Fremantle player, Saints coach for those of you in the AFL, and then more recent times has taken up a business with a guy called Trevor Hendy. You'd remember him, Mr. Nutrigrain back in the day, with a business called LifeChanging. So the guys have got plenty of good value coming real soon, hopefully. LifeChanging has been a program that's primarily for kids, kind of 14 to 15, and obviously plenty around leadership as well. So Scotty won't be too much longer, I don't think, and then we will rip in. But hold tight, it's coming.
Do you want me to try calling and talking through it while you're on?
Yeah, potentially.
What's his number? Do you know?
Oh, yeah. 2 secs, guys.
Need to talk about him for a bit so you can see
Here we go. All right, we've got it, Genoa. We've got it. He's coming. Scotty's here in a sec. I can see it loading up. He's trying. He's requesting. We got there. Big fella, we got there.
How are you, mate?
Very well. You?
I'm going well. I thought I was miles ahead of the game, so just checking in at 7:30. Thinking I had it at 8 o'clock in my calendar, so I apologise.
That is absolutely fine. We were actually just talking about how I was Googling you today, and we're just briefly talking about how good you were shaping up back in your Freo Dockers outfit. I was just looking at reminiscing some old photos from back in the day.
Anyone that was looking half decent in a purple jumper was going okay. The colours were very, very average early in the day.
Yeah, you didn't get your best colours, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mate, thanks for joining us. I want to delve into all things Life Changer in a sec, but I'm keen to start with how you've seen the landscape over the last, 4 or 5 months with everything that's happening with COVID and how you've managed yourself, and also kind of what you might be seeing in terms of how other people are managing, and maybe even a couple of thoughts that people might be able to take on board in terms of helping themselves.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things, even it starts with leadership, whether that's self-leadership or leadership that you consider from if you're leading a team. But right at the very start of COVID for me, it reminded me of some great advice that I got from a mentor when I was in my early 20s, and I'm a fair bit past that now, Blake. But I remember a guy by the name of Gavin Hegney in Perth, who's just an incredible human being. but I was very interested in leadership at that point, and I asked him the question, what does it take to be a good CEO or a good leader? And he sort of rocked back on his chair and said, oh, it's about 4 days of the year. And when I pressed him further on that, it was ultimately, you'll get presented half a dozen days each year that are your leadership gift, ultimately. And they're the most challenging days, but they're the ones that you've got to seize them as an opportunity to support your team or to show leadership or initiative. So when COVID struck, that was, and when any crisis in some ways, whether that comes to your family or personally or from a team point of view, his words always echo in my mind. And there's 3 things that I think you need to do as a leader when any challenge comes. One is accept the situation really quickly. So one being acceptance. It is what it is. You can sit there and procrastinate and woe is me and play the victim, all the different scenarios that you can put yourself in. But ultimately adjust to it very quickly, gather as much information as you can, and just accept it. It is what it is. That's life. 2 is, I guess, comes with perspective, and sometimes it comes with a few more days on the planet.
Yeah.
This too shall pass. So perspective, when you've had that body of experience, whatever it is, it might be different, but you've built up a fair amount of faith in the resilience of maybe of yourself, but also just of us as people. And then the 3rd step to me is, if you can get through those first 2 relatively quickly, you put yourself in the perfect position to seize whatever opportunity is there, or I call it just find the gift or hunt for good. So, it's been a challenging time, but challenging times, they have a downside clearly, but they have a lot of upside too.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I before you jumped on, I was talking about how my time in Melbourne was pretty challenging, but one of the gifts of it was spending some time with you and Ruzi, who I both kind of, look up to and admire from a role model and a mentor point of view. But, I spoke to you, I think 1 week after, maybe even the week that it hit in COVID, because we'd obviously just done some work in Adelaide, and it did hit that day that we're working on Life Changes in Adelaide. It came through at lunchtime. And you were I guess from a leadership point of view, you have to do your best to stay calm, but you managed to pivot. Pivot was obviously the word of 2020, wasn't it? But you managed to pivot really quickly and in a very kind of calm manner. Was that like an automatic thing, or was that thought? Did that thought come to your mind of what your friends said? What kind of happened that week? Because you were as calm as anyone I spoke to in the week that it all shit hit the fan.
Look, it doesn't mean that you. It certainly doesn't mean that you're not challenged by it. But I've always felt that the best place to make good decisions is getting into that composed state as best you can. Everyone's got a heartbeat and a heart rate, and it's certainly been tough. I'm not sitting here saying it's all been easy and plain sailing and I didn't bat an eyelid. That hasn't been the case. But the best analogy that I can give is, and maybe here's a footy analogy. I don't throw many of them out, but when you're walking down from the coach's box, and you're walking through a crowd and there's 60, 70, 80,000, and you could be 10 goals behind and the crowd are going absolutely berserk. You sort of choose to either react to that, or you get yourself into a place of just really composed, clear decision-making space. And that was always where I felt, I wasn't going to let the situation necessarily press my buttons. And purely because, I'm not someone that rides the highs. I don't over-celebrate, but I've never been lying in the fetal position under duress either. That way I feel like I'm best placed to serve my team ultimately. It's
interesting. I can't remember if it was you that taught me that or someone last year, but it's almost like don't get too caught up in your highs, but don't kind of get caught in that self-pity if you're low, you kind of just sit between the two of those. Is that ultimately where you sit with obviously a lot of really good things happening with life changes, and also the downward side, so to speak, of COVID? You just try to rise above the self-pity, but down below where you can kind of get caught up in your own Kool-Aid?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I don't know, community wants us, or society these days wants us to define things in success and failure. Really, they're so similar, and they're really just sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And no matter, you can define yourself by success or failure, or winning or losing. That's a really slippery slope to do that. So it should be effort and composure and values. And sometimes that'll mean you're winning.
Yeah.
Sometimes that'll mean you're losing by those measurements, but they're not really the measurements we should be using.
Yep. That's brilliant. What was there ever a time, so many, one of the things that we've spoken about a lot with Momentum is how many blokes are defined by their identity as the breadwinner, the income earner, the status, whatever it is. And how for so many of them that's been stripped away this year in a really challenging time if they've lost their job or their identity's changed, or they might have had to take a pay cut, whatever that might have been. Was there a turning point for you where you noticed that you're attached to Coach Scotty, player Scotty, and that became detrimental, where you had that attachment to that identity, or was it just something that you've never really been too attached to?
That's a really good question, and you only really know that when you go through a time where you feel like that, that label or that sometimes a false identity gets stripped away. It's a really so I can only talk from, I guess, some of those experiences. So look, being an AFL coach, or any leadership position that has a very public-facing component to it, or being a CEO, or being the breadwinner, all of those things, they're strong labels, and you sort of live through that label. In a coaching sense, it's a very dramatic, going from being the number one person at an AFL football club, really, publicly, to within half an hour you're not. And it's only right at that point that you truly know who you are, or maybe who you haven't put enough work into knowing who you are. So for me, right at that point, which was times within a life where you get to sort of, I guess, think about who you are, really, because you're not your title, you're not your job, you're not what sits on your business card, and often you're not what the public see in a public-facing role. So right at that point for me, in losing a high-profile job, which was quite a long time ago now, I knew I was okay. And then 12 to 18 months later, as we were sort of, I guess, birthing very embryonic stages of the foundation, that was a pivotal question. So why was I okay? Why didn't I feel like I was, crippled and buckled and beaten? I was upset, pissed off, angry, all of those things, but I wasn't broken. And upon reflection, it was because the foundations of my own life, I know who I am and I know what I'm connected to. So, two working class parents, always there if I needed them. Simple as that. Really blue collar upbringing in Fremantle. But if the shit hit the fan, they were there. And I always knew that. And there was plenty of times when I was going down the wrong path. And then, I got connected to my health early, because sport sort of chooses you in a certain way. You might show a bit of aptitude and someone taps you on the shoulder and, all of a sudden, you go, oh, okay, well, someone's saying I'm okay at that. So you follow that pathway, and because of that love and passion of just chasing a footy around the park, which was ultimately where it started for me, you get really linked into your health. So health and family are two really strong foundational pillars that I've just been really fortunate and lucky to have two stable parents, and fortunate and lucky that, you know, at 8, 9 or 10, I could kick a footy. So very lucky, very lucky.
I might get you to elaborate on that, because it's a really interesting point you made. The whole piece around obviously getting the flick from Saints, which would have its challenges, but you mentioned a couple of times there that it hurt, and you went through the wave of emotions, like all of us might, whether it's anger, you know, sense of rejection, whatever that might be. But you mentioned a couple of times that you felt like it didn't define you, or you weren't too attached from an identity point of view because of your parents. So can you phrase that in another way, that because of, you're talking about the stability of your home, or what really mattered to you, that it didn't kind of push you over the edge? What exactly do you mean by that?
The role, it's probably important to separate this a little bit, but I never felt defined. I've never actually felt defined by any role that I've had, because and maybe if you go right back and you put it in a psychologist sort of framework, you know, my hierarchy of needs, you know, particularly a lot of that is served through your parents. That was, you know, I was really well served, so I knew I was valued for who I was. Not what I was doing, not what my performance was. So my dad, you know, so you know, it's funny talking about it. I talk about my sporting career like it's someone else, really, because it feels like that long ago. And hopefully I'm not doing it with any ego, because it was just something that you did. But it was, you know, my dad would rarely, he was not a dad that would overly celebrate my success. He would be there if I needed support. He was never the dad that was really celebrating what I was doing. He was just there, you know, as a dad, and whether I succeeded, failed, I knew I wasn't going to be judged by that. So knowing that, you know that regardless of where the journey sort of takes you and whatever happens, it's just my journey. You know, it's just your journey. It's not who you are.
I love that so much, and I think a lot of people on here have had different experiences with their parents, and it's a really good point you make. And I'm interested in conscious parenting, knowing a fair bit about that imprint period and how important that is to really set your kids' foundation for life, and how many people feel defined by their status or their role, or who they influence on social media or whatever it might be, often coming from that lack of maybe unconditional love for just them as a kid. And I think, to be honest, you know, you and I have spoken a few times, that's definitely something that I've struggled with. I've definitely had different attachments to identities and a whole lot of ego and everything that kind of has played in, you know, over a 35-year period. But it's a really good point that you make. And yeah, from a psychology point of view, the importance of a real good foundation, and that relationship between your parents is really interesting. Mate, talk us through how you got to, or what was the inspiration for Life Changes, and how you got, you know, on board with Trevor Hendy and kind of started it.
Yeah, I'll try and give you the short version, because it's you know, it was a lifetime of different experiences, I think, that sort of brings you to that point. You know, it's really easy to wrap up the birth of any organisation in a catchy story, or anecdote, but it's not that. It's not one cataclysmic sort of event, you know, or tragedy or success. That sort of it was really there was a combination of, you know, my mum was a nurse for, I could give you 10 different reasons, but my mum was a nurse for over 30 years. My Croatian grandmother, the house that was two doors up from where I lived, was always the house where there would be someone different at the table. That just, you know, needed a meal or just needed to be there. then my own journey sort of led to teaching, and teaching led me to working in the juvenile detention centre in Perth called Banksia Hill Detention Centre, which I've been really fortunate to have some amazing roles. I guess being an AFL coach or being involved in coaching is it's a lucky position to have been in, whether that's coaching under eights right through to, and I've coached all of it from under eights right through. But that time I spent within Banksia Hill Detention Centre, it did really give me a look at, it made me very grateful for what I had, but also reinforced my belief inherently that people are good.
Yeah.
So the kids that I was working with there are 13 to 18-year-old Indigenous boys mainly, 65% Indigenous boys. And again, this is my layman analysis. There's probably 2% of kids in there that had some real functional, challenging wiring. Again, it's not a medical terminology, but 98% of those kids were just great kids.
Yeah.
And products of environment. So every step of my journey, if I have to trace a thread back through a lot of it, it's a passion for environment and what a great environment can actually deliver, whether it's for a team or an individual or for yourself. And sort of intuitively, I think I have a good feel for what that needs to look like for people. And I've also just seen a lot of different, I've been fortunate to meet and see a lot of different people and work with a lot of different groups. And there's a lot of common denominators to success and a lot of common denominators for when groups or individuals aren't achieving their best.
Yeah. It's an amazing skill of yours, and we could all probably do with a little bit more compassion and empathy. What do you see when you see a troubled kid? And troubled, I mean it in the most respectful of ways. A lot of people, a lot of us get caught on, seeing what we see, people doing certain things and making judgment on what we see on the surface level or in real time. What do you see when you see a kid in trouble or even an adult kind of behaving in something that doesn't feel congruent or the best version of them? What do you see when you see that?
I think two things. How it's manifested. So whether it's loneliness, isolation, anger, frustration, narcissism, it comes out in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
But ultimately it comes, fear and loneliness is always a key component or a key manifestation of, and how they actually communicate that is very different.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I see opportunity, really. I see opportunity and hope and optimism. Because I don't know if I've met anyone, but I haven't met, if I've met, hundreds of thousands of people over my life, I'd love to know how many. But 99.9% of them want to be good.
Yeah.
They want to be their best.
Yeah.
They want to self-actualize and actually live their best life. That's a goal that I think we all share.
Yeah.
So you see the obvious signposts or alarm bells or however you want to describe that. But you see the potential, and if you see the potential, for me it makes you want to find a way to connect.
Yeah.
And that's different ways to do that. But that probably whenever I think about connection, I think of one boy in the juvenile detention centre. His name was Aquinas, and he came in. He came into Banksia Hill Detention Centre, and the profile was, prior to that, there was 3 months of no communication with any other human being, full stop. And my first introduction to him was walking into my gym at lunchtime when no one was actually meant to come in, and I opened the door and he brushed past me, bumped me on the way through, and then picked up a basketball and just started shooting. And it took about 2.5 months before I finally got one word out of him. but I went through this. It was a battle. It was a contest. It was finding a way to connect with him, and so he'd start shooting hoops on one side, and I'd pick up the ball and I'd wait till he shot, and then I'd walk to the same spot, take a shot from the same spot. It was just this whole mirroring to try and get into his space, and eventually found out that he loved Essendon Footy Club, believe it or not. So I brought in a footy record from a weekend, and it had, I think, Simon Madden and, you know, a few of the names back in the day. And as he walked in the door, I just sort of opened up. I said, "Mate, I heard you like Essendon," and he just looked at it. And his first words to me were, "I can't read, sir." I said, "Well, that's okay, mate." I said, "Let's have a look at the pictures." I said, "You've seen Simon Madden on today." We just started a bit of dialogue.
Yeah.
And it was nowhere near as verbose as I've just put it.
Yeah.
But down the track, that then opened him up to actually taking on some reading activities through an English teacher in the prison. So I think we all want to connect. We all want to be our best. There's a lot of things we're so different, but there's a lot of things we just always share.
Yeah.
As people.
Mate, I don't know you that well. I know we've spent some time together, but that is, for me, one of your most admirable traits, how it's so many of us see what we see on the surface level, but you've just got this, whether it's from your mum being, you know, a nurse for 30 years or you've just had it inbuilt, but your ability to see beyond what we see on the surface level, whether it's a troubled kid, narcissism, behavior, you know, whatever's going on, you have this ability to stay open-hearted, compassionate, empathetic, knowing that it stems from somewhere, and no one's trying to be a dickhead and no one's trying to be nasty or whatever. It all kind of stems from somewhere else. So just want to bring that to your attention. I'm sure it's been brought before, but it is, yeah, by far one of the most admirable traits I've seen in a human, and something that I'm sure is really kind of fundamental to life changes. So give us the scoop on life changes. We got sidetracked a little bit, albeit a super important piece to this, but what is life changes about, and what's the desired goal for you?
So life changer, again, was probably born out of a number of different experiences, but you know, a very pivotal moment for me is I have three boys of my own, 10, 13 and 16 now. And I was probably frustrated at a few things, frustrated at sort of looking through the stats that surround, you know, kids around, obviously suicide being the worst barometer. And I actually heard from a medical expert only yesterday that youth suicides increased by 68% this year alone. You know, so, you know, you look at that as a father, and then all of the other statistics that sort of also sit around that, from self-harm to bullying to, you know, challenges around obesity. There's so many, you know, the amount of mental illness diagnoses that we have right at the moment. And then I think from an ex-coaching point of view, I just lined up all those stats, and I was just like, felt like I was collecting a KPI board for an AFL game, and all of those stats were trending in a very poor direction. So there was that, and then I also felt I was driving through Melbourne. This all happened in a 3-day period, sort of crystallised all these things. But I was driving through Melbourne, pulled up at the lights, and there was a guy that I'd coached sort of at the lights, standing near a traffic sign. And I'd coached him when he was from 16 to 19, and then I'd coached him from 25 to 27 in the AFL. And I hadn't seen him. He just 6 months out of his AFL career, he played 20 or 30 games. And so I sort of gestured over as I looked at him. So I gave him a call and I said, "How are you going?" And he said, "Oh, mate, he said, doing a job that I hate. Just got spat out of the AFL system, and felt pretty bitter and twisted." So let's catch up for a coffee. And so as I drove away, I thought, there's a kid, you know, a young guy, that if I was to list all his qualities, he's a 9 out of 10 across the board. Work ethic, loyalty, honesty, just, yet he's all of a sudden now, he's got no space to use all of those experiences that he's had and apply it and use it, because it's a different, elite sports people are different. They sort of they miss out on a lot, but they also gain a lot. They sort of have an imbalanced development pathway.
Yeah.
So I thought, gee, we could do just such a better job at actually not just sports people, but taking artists, musicians, sports people, the guy that runs a business, runs the garage on the roundabout near where you live, who's learned how to run a small business and probably built it from having, $5,000 in his bank and turned it into something amazing.
Yeah.
All of those experiences that every single person who's listening here tonight, everyone's got their own version of those, but we're not connecting them with enough kids.
Yeah.
And that's why we're waiting for kids to get to a point, and it might be at 15, or it might be at 25, or it might be at 35, 45, where they fall in a hole because we haven't actually, we haven't gathered that wisdom as a community and made sure the pathway for that young person developing is full with wisdom and experience, that it won't fully protect them.
Yeah.
Nor should it. Character comes from finding your own challenge and falling over. But it's a pretty good trampoline to help you bounce again, I reckon. And so Life Changer is about finding mentors, developing mentors, going into a community, and then connecting those mentors with teens from their community, and really working around very foundational positive psychology, building content.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Well, mate, and we've spoken about this a few times, but that was one of the reasons I was really drawn to doing some work with you. Obviously, you as a leader and what Life Changers is doing, because for me, very little in terms of male role models growing up. Well, actually, male and female in terms of my kind of immediate home situation, but also I was a troubled kid. I should have been expelled numerous times, but there wasn't an understanding. It didn't feel like to me there was an understanding from the teachers that I had, the wisdom to know beyond the troubled kid is, pearls of wisdom, or if he's just kind of led in the right path, he can kind of turn things around. So, even spending time when I was in Adelaide with your program and just seeing, watching the kids and watching, the little ones that are kind of sitting there quietly and the vast array of kids that are in the program, how good it would be if I was in their position to have a role model of some sort, to be able to provide some kind of fundamentals and foundation that would help me understand myself, or at least have some kind of direction as well. So, mate, I just love what you're doing, and a couple of ideas that we've spoken about as well, which, you'll hopefully kind of grow into as well. So for those, that may have kids or want to understand more about Life Changes, how would you best describe the programs that you're rolling out at the moment in schools, which are kind of targeted 13 to 15? Is it 13 to 15? Yeah, isn't it? 13 to 15 or 12 to...
Yeah, I think the sweet spot really is sort of that, probably 12 to 14, but as low as 10 and as high as 17, really, across the board. Look, when we were really, once we decided to, we want to do something, that was the first decision. Then it was literally 12 months of going, well, do we have something to offer? And if so, what could that model look like? And I'd encourage anyone that's got kids, or even if you don't have kids, it's a really powerful read to think about your own life. Dr. Anna Rubinstein, The Making of Men, it's a book that always sits by the side of my bed. And it's equally as applicable to boys or men as it is to women. But there's a chapter in that book that talks about positive self-identity. And as I was mulling over, well, what is it? What's the secret sauce? And, what's the real foundation or curriculum, if you like? And there are 5 very key, basic, simple fundamentals, and that's what I liked about it. And our workshop series really hinges on these. 1 is health, the mental and physical health. 2 is life skills. So, right now it's big focus around gratitude, goal setting, resilience, and starting to have a lot of discussions around that with kids. The third pillar is self. Our program is a very safe space for mentors to share experiences and kids to actually have some time to reflect on who they are, how they, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with others. So it's probably not traditionally what fits in many curriculums, but I would argue that it's more important than any subject that's ever undertaken. The fourth pillar really leans in on passion, purpose, and pathways. So it's starting to connect them to what really motivates them. Those moments when you really feel like you're in the flow and you forget time. What does that look like for you? And again, that's so many different things to different people and different kids and adults. And then the last one is really about community or tribe is the pillar. So, and I think right now we're getting some amazing affirmations or our thoughts around tribe as we've been disconnected in so many ways. I think it's very confronting, but also has a really massive upside for community going forward. Right at the heart of every person, I think there's this innate heartbeat that wants us to connect.
Yeah.
With nature, whether it's with ourselves, whether it's with someone else. When you do those things, you're generally close to living the best version of your life.
Yeah.
So our program really hinges on those five pillars.
Yeah. And what have you noticed in terms of what are you, 18 months in?
No, we're a bit further down the track. So 4 years.
Yeah. I was there 18 months ago.
But no, you're not far off. Only 3 years since delivering programs, but the first year there's a fair bit of work that goes in behind the scenes before you even get started, really.
What have you noticed in terms of, because I think, when I went through the pillars, I was looking at them and going, fuck, this stuff's like amazing for, obviously it's targeted to kind of 12 to 14, but it's amazing for, it runs deep well beyond, 12 to 14-year-olds. So what are you noticing the difference, before and after the kid, the pillars and how they interact or how they have an increased self-awareness? What are you noticing the kind of difference with the before and after? Oh, hopefully he'll be back soon to answer that question. Hopefully he'll be back, guys. 2 seconds. Wait another minute or so. Oh, here he is. Oh. All right, he's back. He's coming back, guys. He's back.
Sorry, mate. My iPad is not quite keeping up with me today.
Sorry, mate. I was asking the question about the kind of before and afters that you notice with these guys once they've done the 5 pillars.
Yeah, look, we noticed some amazing things. The typical outcomes. Really, it's across 3 groups when we look at the outcomes. One is the organisation that we're working in. So we notice cultural change within a year group, better relationships between kids and teachers. We measure really strongly, obviously, from the teams themselves. And one of the measurements that I'm always most proud of is a greater sense of optimism and hopefulness for the future.
Yeah.
Whenever I see that come back, we worked with a group of kids last week from Burleigh Heads in a virtual workshop, and it was like 86% from that group of 70 kids experienced or felt a greater sense of hopefulness for the future. Right now, I think that's an incredible thing that always seems to be a typical outcome of our program. From a mentoring point of view, because the mentor component is, I always speak about it after the team component, but mentors express a greater connection to community, or a greater sense of purpose. They improve communication skills, increase in parenting skills. So there's a raft of outcomes that come from programs, and pleasingly, whether they've been regional programs run in smaller areas like a Maryborough or Mount Gambier, right through to running programs in more CBD based metropolitan, the differences or the experiences seem to be very similar.
Yeah. One thing I noticed, because I haven't done a lot of work with kids that age group, although I'm keen obviously to do a lot more, is you can literally see the difference from workshop to workshop with them. Like it's what are they, 45 minutes, 90 minutes? Like to see them change in the space of 3 workshops is amazing in terms of that age group. And I assume at times quite challenging, that age group as well, because they're starting to be influenced by each other as opposed to their parents being kind of the main source of influence. So that, like, it's actually one of the most mind-blowing things. You see this just change in aura about them. And sometimes it's not even words. It's just it's watching how they kind of move or interact. The change there is phenomenal.
Oh yeah. I could give you so many stories, but in one of the workshops that we run, the activation workshop, where they actually get to explore their hero type. So they're either a warrior, guardian, mastermind, or jester, or combinations of all of those, which we all are ultimately. But I'll never forget a mum and dad, after we'd run a workshop with some 13-year-olds in Point Leo. We ran a mentor workshop later. So the mum and dad of the 13-year-old came in after he'd been through his workshop. And the mum approached me and said, "Oh, Scott, you got a moment?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And she said, "Oh, Johnny came through the 13-year-old workshop earlier this evening." And I said, "Oh, yeah, awesome." And then she started tearing up, which caused me to start tearing up as well. And she said, "Oh, look," and I'll never forget her words that are like indelibly sort of printed on my brain. She said, "He's been going through," her exact word, "he's been going through a crap 5 months." He came home, bounced in the door and said, "Oh, Mum, Dad, I have to tell you about my hero type. It's a warrior and it's me." And then she said, "That's the first time we've seen him alive in 5 months."
Yeah.
And I've told that story, I don't know, 100 times. And every time I say it, even right now, it still gets me, because every kid, every person should be that connected to their own potential.
Yeah.
So that happened that was a 90-minute workshop.
Yeah.
That happened. And I've seen the opposite to that. I've seen a kid actually express, working in a small group of 5 or 6. And by the time I got to him and we were sort of, trying to get him to think about what his hero type was. And this is the example of a 15-year-old that was very disconnected. He said, "Oh, sir," he said, "you're missing a hero type. It's trash." And that's me.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking when you hear that. So, those things, the positive change for some can be very quickly. It can be one workshop. Also very realistic too about when they leave our workshop, there are a lot of outside influence as well. So you've got to do what you can do with the time that you have.
Yeah, mate. It pulls so much for me. I think when I look at my troubled school times, like a lot of the loneliness came from just not having that one. Like all I needed was one teacher, and I actually remember. I remember one. Lenny Carlton, who's a footy coach down at Geelong Grammar, who was the one bloke who and I'm still in touch with him now, 20 odd years later, but that's all I needed was just that one coach. Do you know what I mean? So to have a program like that, where all it takes is one mentor, with, you know, some of those kind words or this, you know, newfound belief to believe in you, and it can change, you know, the whole course of where things are heading. So, yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm really kind of drawn to what you do. What's it look like over the kind of coming years? I know one thing that you and I have spoken about, which I'd love to kind of see come to fruition, is around the rites of passage, which is a really interesting period for blokes, generally around that 14, 15 mark, which, you know, I read a lot about rites of passage and how many tribes and communities still do it, well away from the cultures we live in. But what does that look like for you in terms of where ultimately you'd like to go with Life Change, or the impact that you want to have?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, you know, for Life Change's pathway now. There's, you know, I put brackets around COVID. That's sort of halted, you know, for some businesses, it's meant that expansion right now is not the best time for expansion.
Yeah.
But we very optimistically looking at, you know, 2021, obviously. We're already working in 3 states. Certainly national expansion in 2021 is where we're heading. In fact, international in some ways. We already have our first community partnership in New Zealand, in Auckland, with the NBL Huskies, the Auckland Huskies. So we're doing some digital work with them now and their team, but that'll eventually be face-to-face workshops there. So technically we're already international, but we haven't run a workshop there yet. So I'm not claiming that one fully. But there are other opportunities. You know, the rites of passage piece, again, you know, I think the best in Australia at delivering that is Dr. Arne Rubenstein. I'm a huge admirer of his work. We won't do it the same way. And in fact, our piece will probably, you know, I'm very keen to get carers and kids away to have, you know, 3 to 4 day. Still there, mate?
Oh, yeah, gotcha. You're back.
Very keen to have, you know, mums and dads and carers have time away to really connect, away from their normal environment in nature. And have some time. It's more probably a connection piece rather than a rites of passage where, you know, the child or the teenager really gets to see the hero in their parent, and the parent really gets to see the hero in their child. And for different reasons and at different times, you know, being a mum or a dad, and being a teenager, it's not easy. None of it is. Relationships get strained. Different pressures are always applied. You know, mum or dad are trying to just keep things afloat. Kids going through a tough time at school. It's never perfect. It doesn't even get close. So having some time away where they can really nurture that connection, you know, that's something that I'm very committed to. And obviously I would like to get you involved in that as we've discussed, but that's definitely on the radar. And the other thing that is already happening, and it's been piloted really since last July, but will be officially launched in about another month and a half, is Life Changer Performance. So Life Changer Performance is really the corporate or the adult opportunity. So our 5-pillar experience is as applicable from the day you're born to the day you die. So the conversations that we're having with corporates, a lot of that is about breaking down the, you know, the masks and the layers that, you know, in some ways we all build up as adults, but just showing up, should be able to show up wherever you are, being nothing more than yourself. So if there's a disconnect to who you are at home, to who you are when you're by yourself, to who you need to be when you're at work, it shouldn't need to be that. And if that's the case, then you're not actually living your true, full, authentic life. So a lot of those challenging conversations in a corporate space, very interested to expand that part of the business, because adults affect kids. So if we get leaders in a good space, then there's a fair chance they'll help kids get into a great space.
And mate, like, you know, there's a lot of talk around being your most authentic self, but it does actually take a lot of courage to be that, you know, with the masks and the ego and the identity and everything that we built, but to feel comfortable and comfortable in yourself and comfortable in your surroundings, to be your most authentic self is, you know, is probably liberating and freeing as anything that you could feel. So I love that you're pushing for that. And, you know, having spent a bit of time with you guys, and this is credit to you and, you know, I guess to a certain degree, Trev as well, is you've created, it starts at the top, and you guys have created an environment, you know, when I came and did some workshops with you, you created an environment that feels as comfortable to be, you know, my most authentic self as anywhere. So the fact that you've built a culture, you know, that's what you stand for, and there's true alignment in that, is also an impressive thing that you've done as well. So credit on that.
Mate,
So,
just on that, Blake.
yeah.
I just wouldn't mind sharing one thing, just, you know, with whoever's listening, but because it was only something that I probably really realised, I'll say over the last 5 years, and I'm 51 now. And Trev's had his own version of this, and it's why Trev and I are so aligned. You know, life is hard, and if you live long enough, you're gonna be you're gonna be absolutely you're gonna be knocked on your ass.
Yeah.
If you're really aiming to live your best life. Great. So Trev's been through his version of that.
Yeah.
Now Trev, you know, Hall of Fame athlete, 6-time Ironman, you know, and on the surface of that's every boy's dream. Yet Trev went through, you know, and I say this openly, and Trev wouldn't mind me sharing, but, you know, he's been through financial challenges. He's, you know, went through a divorce, etc. And all of those things, and I had my own versions of that. You know, getting sacked as an AFL coach is, you know, that's a humbling experience. But it's from those moments that you get a different view of your own potential. You certainly get from it, you know, it's a blessing in so many ways, because your ego or any masks that you may be wearing, literally, it's just you. You're just naked in the storm, you know. And that's great, because out of that you emerge knowing you know who you are. And it's a Jordan Peterson, who I'm just loving all of his stuff at the moment. You know, there was a quote, and I'll butcher this quote, but it was something along the lines of, and he took it from somewhere else, but it was, we don't often get low enough, and it's called humility, but we don't often get low enough you've got to get really, really low to get a good view of yourself. Yeah. And as human beings, we don't allow ourselves to get low enough. So sometimes the worst situation, is the perfect situation to rebuild from, or confirm what you stand for. Yeah. So for any people that have been through the fire, and all of us will in our own different versions, be thankful. Be thankful for